have a brief introduction to Professor Grant. He asked me not to read the whole thing, but in his humility, it was very short, so I might just go ahead and read it all. He's married to Aubrey. They have 7 kids, and it says here a passel of grandchildren. Bruce loves language. Spent 64 years, he says, bungling it. I don't think that's true. The first foreigner to earn a BA in Korean language from a Korean university. He has a master's degree in Chinese character pedagogy from USC. He worked 30 years in Seoul as a political analyst for the U.S. government and reached the position of Deputy Special Advisor to the Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Forces, Korea, and from a position from which he retired last year. His mission as an LDS missionary was to Korea, where he spent 3 years, much of that time working on the translation of the Book of Mormon into Korean. He's taught Korean extensively and is currently a visiting professor in the Department of Asian and Near Eastern Languages, and is an esteemed colleague of which we are very proud. He brings to our department experience and experience that most of the rest of us only think about once in a while, and inaccurately, so we're pleased to have him. He published a well-received handbook of Sino-Korean characters, Hangul and Hanja, and several other books, and has won the Korean Pen Club's Literary Translation Award for his interpretive, and has interpreted for 4 out of the last 5 Korean presidents. And so, as you can see, he has very impressive credentials. And I'm sure he knows what he's talking about. It will be interesting to me to hear his discussion if we think Saudi or Iraq is problematical. If we get into a skirmish with North Korea, we'll learn what a real skirmish is about. So I hope that that doesn't happen, but we'll be glad to hear from Professor Grant at this point.
Thank you, George. I think I left my notes down there somewhere. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm very happy to see my old excuse me, my old mentor, Paul Heyer, here. Appreciate George's introduction. I was hoping for a small group because I don't like formalism, and I don't want to be formal in presentations. And so I would hope that we can just visit and talk, and you may ask, and please ask questions and make comments as we're going along. In fact, let's take this more as a lecture in a classroom than a speech. They said it's very easy to turn this on. I just click it 2 to the left, which I'm not used to going to the left, so I don't know how that works. Let's try it now, see how it works. Yep. Okay, the war in Korea was not my title. I think it was kind of given to me. And, of course, that is a major issue. Will we have war in Korea? I don't know if we'll answer that today, but we'll probably come close to it. I'd like you to think about it, though, as we go through this. Now, the North Korean nuclear issue is a very controversial one. The last time I was in this room, in fact, I was involved in a debate on that issue, which is very heated. There were 2 or 3 professors over there on the left who kind of bashed me a lot. I was over here on the right. And I was a little unhappy with that because I think the North Korean issue is a compelling one for our country, one that we should look at from the point of view of what American interests are at stake and what we can do about it. At a time right now when the nation is polarized, indeed when the world in some senses has become polarized or even slid to the left, and at a time when the U.S. presidential election is in full voice, roar, it's kind of hard to look at issues and dampen the controversy. And the way I've decided to do that today is simply to present a lot of facts. And I've got 30 slides here, and every one of them is merely a factual representation. And that's why I'm soliciting your participation in these things. I mean, we'll read them on this, we'll read the slides, and then if you don't say anything, I'll go on to the next slide, and you'll spend a very boring 30 minutes. And then at the end of that time, we'll try to draw some conclusions, which I will ask you to do. Where is the microphone? You got it? So when you have a question or something, you've got to bring the mic over. As they say, they want to record them. They want you to speak in the mic so they can record these proceedings. I can't imagine why they'd want to. Do you have any questions to start with? Yes, sir. Paul?
Lots of questions.
Go ahead.
Is time on their side or on our side?
It's on your side. Oh, you mean North Korea?
Yes. As things drag out, as they are doing now for a year, 2 or 3, who knows?
One of the biggest criticisms of the Bush administration right now is that it has not joined actively in a dialogue with North Korea. And as resultingly, North Korea has had time to increase its nuclear stockpile. So in that sense, many people believe that time is on North Korea's side because it's building bombs as we speak. On the other hand, if you look at time over a little longer period, if you presume that North Korea will economically sinify, then you may also presume that North Korea will increasingly feel that it has will feel that it has a decreasing need for nuclear weapons, and we may therefore get by a major confrontation. That's the end of this whole speech. We can all go home after this now. Thanks, Paul. Great question. Got another one? I'm ready. Yeah. Go ahead, Paul. If you got some more, I'm ready.
I just have a question on, for at least I can't speak for my generation, but I don't, maybe perhaps the media, I just don't see North Korea, obviously we're told it's a threat, but it's not discussed very often or very much at all. This is very ignorant, but should we be worried about North Korea? And if so, why don't we talk about it more? Or is the media not covering it as much? Is it because of the domination? I mean, that's a really open question, but I don't think we hear a lot about North Korea as much as we should, or if we need to.
There was a nuclear crisis with North Korea in 1994. A second crisis began in October of 2002. We'll look at that here. So it's not so much generational as it is immediate past memory. But the Korea situation does seem to be like a 14-year cicada or something that only emerges from the ground and makes a lot of noise infrequently. When it comes up, though, it hits the television screens pretty hard. I think that'll answer it. Yeah, it is a crucial issue, and we'll be going through in a minute why it is. Good, thank you. Any more? Relax, folks. Yes, sir.
I had a question that I've been thinking about a lot with, in particular to North Korea. Whenever you think about a war or why a country would want to start a war with another country, usually there's an underlying factor such as what is that country going to gain by starting a war with another country? And so I guess that's my question to you. What would North Korea benefit by starting a war with the biggest military that the world's ever seen?
If there is war on the Korean Peninsula, it could start with a North Korean invasion of South, or it could start with a U.S. bombing of North Korean nuclear facilities. If the former, then North Korea would have to gain the 10th largest economy in the world. And if the latter, North Korea would be reacting to a military challenge mounted by the United States. Here it is, right behind you.
Thanks. So more than anything, it's North Korea threatening South Korea, and it's us siding with South Korea, saying that if you attack South Korea, then we will likewise attack you.
It used to be, but nowadays it's more like South Korea is on North Korea's side against the Bush administration, fearing that the Bush administration will mount a surgical strike on North Korean nuclear facilities, to which North Korea might respond with a full-scale artillery attack on Seoul, which could lead to war.
Okay.
Thank you. Good questions. Anybody got a bad question? I appreciate one. Okay, we'll do it.
One more right here.
Go ahead. Yeah, Paul.
I think in this country, people with your experience and background, we could count on one hand, maybe not even, might be less than that. And many of us don't approve of a lot the policies of Bush and input they're getting. And they talk to you. Are you at liberty to say that they know what your assessments are and your considered opinion after 30 years there? And you read their papers every day?
Well, I retired a year ago, so they paid little attention to me before that, even before that, probably much less now. But I suppose the larger question is, do policymakers pay any attention to intelligence analysts? And the answer to that is not if the analysis contradicts their political instincts, and if their political instincts, and if politics is a big issue to them at the moment. If, however, a policymaker is not driven by political motives or political situation, then that policymaker will pay more attention to intelligence analysts. And then, of course, we have the issue we have today is whether the intelligence analysts know what they're talking about, as in the case of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I spent over 30 years in the intelligence business, so if you would like to zap me over that or ask further questions about that, feel free. If not, we're going to bore you to death. Is this the one? I don't know how this thing works. I am. I promised you a lot of facts, and here they come. But that doesn't mean I have to stay by this microphone because I said I didn't want a mobile mic. You see that the North Korean interest in the nuclear issue began very early. The Korean War lasted from 1950 till 1953. So during the Korean War, North Korea started an atomic energy research center. After the war, North Korea made a number of reportedly made overtures to Russia and China regarding assistance on a nuclear program. China is embarking on a nuclear weapons program, also seemed to motivate North Korea to do more with that. And we have reports after the end of the Cold War that Kim Il-sung, who was the president, was the president, or the head, let's call him president, who was the head of North Korea in those years, and reportedly asked the Russians for permission to use a Russian nuclear test site. And presumably he was not going to test firecrackers there. So in any case, North Korea has had a long-term interest in nuclear issues. Do you have any questions about that slide? It's crucial that you understand North Korea's long-term issue to see that the nuclear issue is not going to go away quickly, to see that the impetus for acquiring nuclear weapons is a North Korean commitment of long standing, and that the U.S. interests must therefore deal with that, and that we should transcend partisan interest. We should transcend what Clinton did about it or what Bush is doing about it. We should look at the thing in terms of our own national interest. So in 1979 and 1980, you see the larger reactors begun. They are still not completed. And the CIA believes that their completion is still, quote, several, unquote, years away. Several is a big word. We all see that word differently. To me, it means about 3. To most people, it's an indeterminate number, but around over a dozen. In any case, those are still in the future. It's important to notice in 1984 that the North Korea reverse engineered an Egyptian Scud-B missile. Since that time, North Korea has ardently pursued missile technology development. It has copied most of the Russian Scud missile types, has sold them to countries all over the world, in Africa and especially the Mideast. I realize we're talking about a generational gap here, as you mentioned a minute ago. But there was a war in the Mideast back in 1990, which most of my students don't remember, and probably you won't. But at that time, Iraq fired missiles into Saudi Arabia, killing dozens of American soldiers there with one missile, and also fired missiles into Egypt. Those missiles were North Korean missiles. They were North Korean Scud missiles. So that was back in 1990. It's kind of hard to overestimate the impact of the North Koreans' export of Scud missiles. I think we all know that North Korea is a bigger country, that its economy is literally doing nothing. Its people have been starving to death since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and starving probably as many as 3 million of them probably starved between, say 1992 and 1996. So that the export of missile technology and equipment is one of North Korea's, is probably North Korea's biggest money earner. And that raises the issue of what North Korea will do with fissile material or with nuclear weapons. If they need money that badly, will they not be tempted to sell that stuff to rogue nations or even to terrorist groups? And therein lies a motivation for a U.S. administration to take direct action. And there is a fuse burning, I might as well say it now ahead of time. That fuse is a uranium-based nuclear program. North Korea is only getting it going, but a uranium-based program is diffused. It's hard to spot and virtually impossible to destroy from the air, or from the ground for that matter. Until now, North Korea's program has been plutonium-based, and that requires large facilities that are obvious on satellites and that can be attacked from the air. So in a sense, and North Korea, the U.S. says that North Korea has a uranium-based program, and North Korea denies it. So it's not even on the table yet. In fact, the United States is demanding it be on the table, and North Korea says, we're not doing it, you can't prove it. So therein is kind of the crux of where we're going with this thing. If we can wait for North Korea to economically sanify, as I say, and to get some money, then that'll be less of a problem, but even that's going to take a long while. The NP is NPT number 1985. That's the the Non-Proliferation Treaty. In 1986, things began to heat up on the nuclear front in North Korea. In 1986, when that 5,000 kilowatt research reactor came online. That's a small reactor. In that same year, 1986, now if you want to track politically what's going on here, that's right after Reagan left office. That's when Bush Sr. was president. And I kind of hold him responsible for not doing anything about the North Korean nuclear thing at that time. If a surgical strike on North Korean nuclear facilities were ever justified or ever easy to do, it would have been then, before the plutonium had reached any serious volume. But our satellites at that time saw explosive testing at Yongbyon, and they saw it for many years, and analyzed it to be the testing of high explosive triggers for nuclear weapons. In '86, we saw a fuel reprocessing plant. A reprocessing plant is one that takes expended fuel rods from a nuclear reactor and makes pure plutonium powder or liquid out of it, and then then the plutonium must be changed into a metal in order to be used in a weapon. In '89, the U.S. decided that North Korea was making nuclear weapons. In '91, the U.S. withdrew nuclear weapons from Iraq, and President Bush, the first, actually announced that and said he was doing that from all around the world. Probably he was doing it partly in reaction to Japanese public opinion, but in large part it was because of the North Korean nuclear issue. The U.S. believed that maybe the North Korea felt threatened by our tactical nuclear weapons in the South, so we removed them, if we had any there. There's no one government will ever say that they were there, and I have no personal knowledge that they were there. But since President Bush said we're taking them out if they were there, I guess we can say that much. In 1992, North Korea finally accepted safeguard inspections by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Commission, which is an arm of the United Nations, but largely controlled by the United States. Now, let's see. Korea joined the NPT in 1985. I believe that treaty calls for acceptance of inspections within 2 years, and they didn't accept them until 1992, much late, and the word partial is up there because they excluded certain of their plutonium-related processing facilities from inspection by the IAEA safeguards people. In other words, we do not know how much plutonium the North Korea produced in those early years. In 1993, after the IAEA continued to push for those inspections, North Korea simply said we're not going to do it, and that began the first crisis over the North Korean nuclear issue in the first years of the Clinton administration. Right in the middle of the crisis, Kim Jong-il died. Jimmy Carter went up to North Korea a couple of weeks, I believe, before Kim died, and talked to Kim and got him to agree to negotiate this crisis with the United States. And Jimmy Carter called Clinton directly in the White House from Pyongyang. At that moment, when Clinton took the call, he and his aides were discussing whether to mount a surgical strike on North Korean nuclear issues. And Carter's call allowed Clinton to postpone that, but it shows you how close we came to war under a democratic, or not war, we came to a precision strike on nuclear facilities by a Democrat with a capital D, a Democratic administration. So the underlying issue here kind of goes beyond partisanship. It's easy today to believe that Bush is the father of all evil when it comes to North Korean issues, but as you see, it goes much beyond that. Got any questions right now? If you do, please do them. 1996, U.S. pressure's cancellation of the Nodong missile. Nodong means labor. The term for Communist Party in North Korea is the Labor Party. So Nodong, you're saying this is our communist missile. It's a Scud version. I think a Scud B, essentially a Scud B weapon, and we should not denigrate it in any way, shape, or form. It's I think the kind of thing that Iraq fired into Israel 14 years ago. In 1998, North Korea fired a 3-stage Podong-1 missile. Now, we're kind of jaded when it comes to missiles, but I actually drove up to Thiokol and when that happened, or because of that 1998 firing, and talked to some missile engineers up there and was startled to learn that although any kid can put together a 1-stage missile and any country can put together a 2-stage missile, a 3-stage missile requires an high technological capability. Now, that 3rd stage apparently did not work on the North Korean missile. It also helped in goading Japan in what we might call a neoconservative stance, public stance, because the North Koreans, without informing anybody they were launching that missile, fired that Podong-1 over the Japanese islands. The Japanese did not know about it until they were informed by the United States military. So the Japanese government lost face, and the Japanese people became angry. And the movement you've seen in Japan since 1998, for example, to back off to some extent from their peace constitution, let's call it, stems from Japanese concern over that missile, and later from learning that North Korea had kidnapped less than a dozen, about 8 or 10, a number of Japanese people just come in and kidnap them off of boats, ships out of the sea, including one middle school girl on her way home from school just come and kidnapped her, took them to North Korea and used them to teach their spies how to speak near-native Japanese. Those two issues, the missile and the kidnapping, remain sticking points or irritants in the Japanese-North Korean relations to this day. In '99, North Korea tested a propulsion system that can reach the U.S., and we'll come back to the missiles after a while. That's the end of, no, it isn't. In 1999, the U.S. said that North Korea is doing a secret uranium program. Remember, up to now it's been plutonium. In 1999, we said, we think you're doing this program, we think you're doing uranium, and we'd like to talk to you about it. They wouldn't talk to us about it. Also in 1999, the North Korean Defense Ministry and later the Minister of Foreign Affairs speaking to the National Assembly in Korea, South Korea, said that North Korea had 5,000 tons of chemical weapons and a large significant amount of biological weapons. On the website of the Federation of American Scientists, which is a non-government group and I think maybe a faintly liberal group, they say that 5,000 tons may be a gross underestimate. And they say on that site, for example, that Russia and China gave chemical weapons data to North Korea during the Korean War, way back in 1950 to 53. So it's likely that North Korea has a major chemical weapons capability today. It's likely, too, that their biological warfare program is not as far advanced, but probably is substantial. Nobody knows, least of all myself. In 2000, the Washington Times reported that North Korea sold Iran ballistic missile engines. If you take a look at the Iranian missiles, they have names that are very Arabic, well, not Arabic, but are very, Farsi-like, but in fact they are simply rip-offs or copies of North Korean missiles. In 2000, North Korea announced moratorium on missile tests because it was trying at that time to get Clinton to visit North Korea. Clinton sent his Madeleine Albright, his Secretary of State, to North Korea, the highest-ranking person who's ever yet visited North Korea from the U.S. government. The purpose of her visit was to hammer out the last details of concessions on both sides, especially on the North Korean side, which would then allow Clinton to visit North Korea. The North Koreans were certain that the Democrats would win the election, that Bush would not win, and they therefore refused to make those last few concessions in what has to go down as one of the biggest strategic errors that the North Koreans have ever made. And they don't make many. They're very good at international affairs because they were forced for decades to play off China and Russia with each other. North Korea shares a border with those two countries, and it knows how big country politics or international politics works, and it's very good at dealing with anybody, and very, very good at dealing with the United States, which every 4 years gets a new leader and a new coterie of cabinet and sub-cabinet leaders that have forgotten what went on 5 years before. Oh, excuse me, I've spoken like a career civil servant, if you'll forgive me. Clinton finally had to abandon his plans to visit Pyongyang at the last minute. And the Clinton administration always believed, and I believe Democrats with a capital D today believe, that the Bush administration dropped the ball. They almost had this hammered out, and they should have gone forward with it. In fact, it was so flawed that I would not have gone forward with it, but we'll see. I'll show you. We'll talk about why in a minute. I think I can say safely, and this is not in my field of expertise or anything, but the world since the end of the Cold War has drifted to the left, or maybe it has maybe it has jumped to the left. So the election of Bush in 2000 ran contrary to what was happening in many other countries around the world. And before anybody knew anything about Bush, Bush was a monster and a bugaboo, and was attacked in newspapers in South Korea and elsewhere in Asia. But since I specialize in South Korea and North Korea, and of course the North Korean papers, but even in South Korea, Bush was villainized and remains a villain in South Korea to this day. And that's also true around the world because of Iraq, maybe. But it's important to note that the vilification of Bush happened before Bush even was inaugurated, that it is a reaction to the victory of the right in the U.S. presidential election that year, that the world has slipped to the left. Certainly South Korea has slipped to the left. And it's just something to bear in mind. Sure.
Could you explain from the South Korean point of view what you see in their newspapers? What's their rationale for, I'm anti-Bush too for that matter, but why do they look to the North, and what's their rationale in not maintaining a united front with the Americans and the Japanese against North Korea?
I've got some slides on that in a minute, Paul, but let me say here that they still are maintaining a front with us at the government-to-government level. But anti-Americanism is flowering, blossoming in South Korea. And their peak, or their hatred, I should say, even, for Bush stems from their perception that he is willing to conduct a military strike against North Korean nuclear facilities. They believe, North Korea has a highest concentration of artillery weapons in the world stationed north of Seoul in locations where they can put down, I believe, I'm speaking from memory here, but it's something like 100,000 tons, maybe pounds, of artillery fire onto the capital city of Seoul, which is only 25 miles from the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, per day, or is it per hour? Anyway, it's a huge amount of fire they can lay down. So the North Koreans are paralyzed with that. Also, the other thing the South Koreans are paralyzed with that. The other thing that's important to realize is the South Koreans, and this is true, I think, of other peoples, but maybe more so in South Korea, they are people of the times. They have to have the newest of technology, the newest radio, or the newest TV. You will see, as you already see, Samsung is at the forefront of gadgets, electronic gadgets that you can buy, and so there is a term in South Korea commonly used, which is the flow of time, or the flow of the times, I guess is a better way to say it. And South Korea believes that it sees the flow of the times. And it sees the end of the Cold War as a chance for it to get out of the bifurcation that was visited upon the Korean Peninsula by the United States and Soviet Union in 1945. And they therefore look at Bush as a throwback to an earlier bygone era. And those are the basic reasons why they dislike Bush. That and growing anti-Americanism. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I actually just got back from a mission in South Korea about a month and a half ago, and just similar sentiments. I'm a political science major, so I've asked a lot of my companions, or a lot of the investigators that we had, what their feelings about Bush were, and they're very aware of their westernization. They really love the new gadgets and things like that. They love America's things, but as far as like Bush, it was my understanding that they saw him as very rash, very imperialistic, very willing to go into Iraq or push his agenda.
Sure. But their South Korean abhorrence of Bush predates Iraq. I left out something. I probably should bring it up here. 7 years ago, until 7 years ago, no, that's not the way to say it. From 1961 until 1992, South Korea was ruled either by direct military dictators or by military dictators who had doffed their hats and entered the political arena and managed to win the presidency because the opposition was split. So there was a 5-year period starting 12 years ago when a guy who was a pure civilian became president of Korea, but in order to become president, he left the opposition, which had been split, and joined forces with the military party, which no longer had any general to run because they had all served. Then 5 years after that, or 7 years ago, South Korea got a liberal center-left government under Kim Dae-jung. That government is the one that led the charge back to North Korea, and it has been In January of 2003, in January 2003, Kim was replaced by No Mu-hyun, who was Kim's designated successor and who himself heads a left-of-center government. One of the things that caused hatred for Bush was Kim Dae-jung, as you know, won a Nobel Peace Prize. He was in the opposition for decades, was targeted for assassination and for execution by the military government. And he ill-advisedly rushed off to see the present President Bush. As you remember, the Bush administration got off to a late start because they weren't sure they were going to be in administration. And before they had their policy ducks lined up, and even before their sub-cabinet positions were filled, Kim Dae-jung insisted on coming over and insisted, I believe, as a much older man, over 80 at that time, in bearding Bush and teaching him about North Korea. And I think we all know by now that nobody beards Bush, for good or for bad. You just don't do that. And their meeting resulted in Kim Dae-jung returning to South Korea with his tail between his legs, and that embarrassed him and the Korean people. So that was yet another of the triggers that got Bush off to a bad start in there. Bush administration mutiny calls for talks. The Bush administration said, okay, North Korea, we need to talk to you about this, but it didn't have its ducks lined up. It wasn't anxious to talk to them, and we need to face this face this squarely. Bush himself, and I suppose many of his important advisors, regarded North Korea, and especially its leader Kim Jong-il, as a liar because it had signed a pact with the Clinton administration in 1994 to freeze its nuclear program, and the Bush and Clinton administration already before it left office had information, intelligence information, that North Korea was not just skirting, but avoiding that agreement with the U.S. by starting its uranium-based program. So that has been a stickler from the beginning to the I hate to call them ideologues, but I guess I will. To the ideologues of the Bush administration, the North Koreans were simply not going to be forgiven for for breaking their agreement to freeze their nuclear program. And then September 11 happened, and it's kind of academic, so to speak. Bad word around here. I apologize to you for that one, George. It's kind of academic around here to talk about the Bush administration's policy prior to 9/11. After 9/11, we all know what happened to it. And in January, the following January, North Korean Bush named three countries in the axis of evil. One was North Korea. Whatever the South Korean people thought of Bush, before that term did it. The term axis of evil caused the South Korean people to believe that Bush was going to attack North Korea, their brothers, and so forth. Since that time, North and South Korea, well, not quite since that time. I should have put it up here, but I didn't. On the 15th of June, yesterday was the 4th anniversary of this, in 2000, Kim Dae-jung went to North Korea and had a summit with Kim Jong-il, his counterpart up there, and relations between North and South have warmed ever since to degrees that no observer could have imagined before that. So at a time when Bush is freezing or is chilly toward North Korea, South Korea is going toward North Korea like that. I suppose it doesn't matter too much. No, I don't. I'm not really a great fan of Kim Dae-jung, and therefore I will say that he paid a $500 million bribe to the North Koreans for that summit meeting. And it's just downright embarrassing, although I frankly believe it's kind of typical of his regime. Yes.
This is good, the facts and the timeline. What's your judgment on that axis of evil? Like the rest of us, that was a bad judgment? That was a bad pronouncement for Bush to lump those things together like that? And label North Korea with it?
You know, if I were president, I would probably have to fault myself. If I were Bush, I would feel like that I had made a mistake not to have somebody with deep diplomatic sensibilities reviewing all of my speeches, much less a State of the Union speech. I understand that speechwriter was fired 2 weeks after this. Okay, but that's not even closing the door. That's an invisible door that nobody's even going to notice. The damage has been done. So that's kind of my view of it. By the way, I also, in front of my classes, so I have evidence of this, opposed the Iraq War before it started. I saw no justification for it at that time. And I regard myself as a moderate on all these things. I'm not, I refuse to vote for Bush, but I'll be darned if I can vote for Clinton either, that kind of guy, yeah. As far as the ability of the United States to invade Iraq as opposed to North Korea is as 1 to 1,000. In other words, it's 1,000 times easier to invade Iraq than North Korea. Just period. For any number of reasons. To wit, North Korea was bombed back into the pre-Stone Ages during the Korean War. As a result of that, it has spent the last 40 years putting underground and in tunnels everything of value in the country, especially military value. It is therefore exceptionally difficult to attack North Korea. Moreover, it is a peninsula. So how are you going to attack it? Moreover, it is very mountainous. There are only 2 major avenues that tanks can even use between North and South Korea. Contrast all of that to Iraq, which is all opposite. It's a big flat desert where you can do a tank anytime. So I don't believe that the Bush administration, even 2 years ago, had a lot of interest in invading North Korea. And it has even less now after Iraq, I suppose. Yeah.
Sorry, not that, but it's just that they had more
Nuclear capabilities? Well, we didn't know what Iraq has. I mean the U.S. government thought it knew what Iraq has, and it did not. Yeah.
I'm a believer in the big boy on the street taking care of problems in its own backyard, such as if there's a problem in Haiti or Panama. I think that's something we should deal with. But my biggest question is, honestly, besides the fact that we have 35,000 troops there and that we started the Korean War, why do we care if North Korea takes over South Korea?
We didn't start the Korean War.
Okay, take that back. But besides that fact, why do we care? Why don't we let China and Russia solve this problem? Why do we care? Because I don't believe that North Korea is going to start firing ICBMs into our country after they've attacked South Korea.
Well,
and besides the moral reasons and the philosophical reasons of why we should do it, but as they're bad-mouthing us, and I've been on South Korean websites before.
I guess at the very bottom, your question is kind of poor or foolish. I mispronounced poor.
Okay.
Because you're talking as if you were in the 19th century and this is the 21st. The weapons of this century do not allow us the privilege of defining a backyard. The world is our backyard. And that's the bottom line. As far as the individual issues in your question, that some of them will come out during this. And if I haven't answered them, you can get to me later. But that's the basic problem. There is no limitations on ballistics missiles.
So you feel that they do have, we talked about that a little bit earlier, how they had attempted 3-stage missiles and things like that. So have they perfected a ICBM that could actually reach our country and one that couldn't be fired or shot down by us?
I don't know about shooting down, but I do know that the Nodong missile will reach every place in South Korea and most of the places in Japan. So why does North Korea need a Taepodong missile? You have to answer that. In 2002, Bush does not certify Congress that North Korea is abiding by the Agreed Framework. I think I skipped over that, but the Agreed Framework was what Bush signed with the North Koreans in 1994 after Carter's call that led to the defusing of the nuclear issue at that time. It is a very flawed agreement. Probably because the Clinton administration at the time believed that North Korea was about to collapse, and therefore it didn't really matter what you agreed to with them. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, you said Bush in '94, and I think you meant Clinton.
Did I? Oh, I sure did mean Clinton. Thank you. That's the background. This is the present crisis. Any questions about the background? The present crisis began in October 2002, when Bush administration, now with 9/11 behind it, and with, was Iraq behind it at that time? I guess not. Coming up, wasn't it? Finally decided to sit down with North Korea, and it sent Assistant Secretary of State James Kelly, a former professor, to North Korea to talk with the North Koreans. He accused them of having a uranium-based program. It was on a Friday night, And the negotiator said, that's a lie. We do not have a uranium-based program. They went home that night. They met again the Saturday morning. The negotiator came back in and said, well, we do. What you're going to do about it? Now, a negotiator would not admit to having uranium-based, any nuclear development program like that on his own. All right? So he had obviously gone to see Brother Kim Jong-il. And Brother Kim Jong-il made another strategic blunder by admitting that to the Americans. And they have been denying it ever since. And the United States, and North Korea continues to claim the United States is lying about it. But to the Bush administration, that only confirmed the intelligence that the U.S. had gotten since 1999 about this. And I'm not privy to all the intelligence, but I have seen in open sources remarks to the fact, if you're going to have a uranium program, you have to have centrifuges that somehow spin the uranium, right? And that's what makes it. But these don't need to be together; they can be diffused or separated. But it takes hundreds of them. And so these things cannot be manufactured in North Korea. So if apparently then the CIA had information that North Korea was acquiring voluminous numbers of these centrifuges, probably got that information in 1999 or 2000, I don't know. But in any case, it's pretty strong indication we are told by the intelligence community about that. That caused us, CATO is a Korean Peninsula Energy Development Association organization, which is the United States, Japan, and the European Union and South Korea. As part of the framework agreement in 1994 with Clinton, thank you, we agreed, the United States agreed to give, I think, a lot of oil to North Korea every year, 100,000 tons, I believe. We also agreed that the CATO would build 2 light water reactors, which are hard to extract plutonium from. For North Korea. Then in December of 2002, North Korea ordered the IAEA monitors out and restarted its 5-kilowatt reactor. This is in reaction to the U.S. public statement that the North Korea told them that they had that program. So that's when the present and the second, you might say, nuclear crisis began. In January, North Korea withdrew from the NPT. In April, NK announced that it is reprocessing 8,000 spent fuel rods that had been in storage in North Korea, enough to make about 6 nuclear weapons. Things went badly. The Iraq war started. Kim Jong-il apparently went into hiding for 60 or 80 or 90 days, fearing the United States would attack him as well as the president of Iraq. And finally, the China hosted talks between the two. They failed. The press said the United States proposed multilateral security arrangement with North Korea. The U.S. said the North Korea negotiators admitted to possessing nuclear weapons. In fact, the reports were the North Korean negotiators actually boasted about it. And that has been a consistent feature of the North Korean public relations with the nuclear program. We have got these nuclear weapons. What are you going to do about it? Many people, especially on the conservative side, especially on the Bush administration side, will have said in response, we don't believe them. We don't believe that they might have a couple of weapons, but they don't have 20. They're not really doing this. And I think that that's kind of been wishful thinking. I do believe that North Korea has probably exaggerated its nuclear capability, but I believe that it's not lying that it has one. In June, North Korea said that the 8,000 rods are reprocessed. Other indications are that they didn't finish that until the end of the year, but in any case, they probably have finished it. In January of this year, they invited some non-governmental people, including a U.S. nuclear scientist, to view that area. They didn't show them enough that they could be certain of what they were seeing, but they did see the empty pond where the rods had been stored. They were shown plutonium in metal form. They weren't what was said to be uranium in metal form, but the U.S. observers could not be certain that was plutonium. But if it was, they noticed that it was well done, that there were no flaws in it. And if it were plutonium, it suggested an advanced capability on the part of the North Koreans. In August, the Bush administration seeks a new relationship with North Korea, but demands CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantling of the nuclear program. In 2003, in August, North Korea says it wants a non-aggression pact. There's only been one of those signed in history, wasn't that, between Russia and Germany? I mean, Soviet Union and Germany. It wants normal relations and money for dismantling. In August, however, North Korea agreed, even after the failure of the talks in April, to six-party talks. And by this time, Bush administration's approach was, we will not hold bilateral talks with you, but we will talk to you in a multilateral forum. Somebody asked the question about why don't we get Russia and China involved? We did. The six-party talks involved the U.S., North Korea, South Korea, Japan, Russia, and China. And China is the prime mover for it. So those talks ended in acrimony. In September, Bush hinted that the U.S. might provide some incentives to North Korea. After all, because, to that point, the Bush administration refused to even consider paying any kind of compensation to North Korea for halting its nuclear program. On September 3rd, there was a massive parade in Pyongyang in which the North Korean leaders vowed to proceed with their nuclear program and rejected six-party talks. But in October, it said it can build, not only has it processed the rods, but it can take the next step, take the reprocessed plutonium and make it into the metal necessary, and then take the metal to fabricate nuclear weapons. It threatened to test the nuclear device, which alienated virtually everybody in the world, caused North Korea to suffer, and actually hurt the South Korean economy, because South Korea by this time is closely identified with North Korea. And the South Korean economy continues to be in a down state, but the South Korean press, I've never seen the South Korean press or anybody in South Korea publicly say that that is related to the North Korean nuclear issue. They blame it on other things. Bush offers a written non-attack guarantee, since North Korea says that North Korea laterally, you see they started this nuclear impetus has been there for 40 years, and who knows, that impetus may come from fear of the United States or the U.S. nuclear ability. In any case, North Korea began to publicly say that about this time, just in early 2003. The North Korea laughed that off, but then in November, the North Korea agreed to return to the six-party talks. Standard & Poor's warns of possible collapse in North Korea, says it may take the South Korean down with it. I don't think it's that bad. Cato at that time announced a suspension of the light water reactor program in North Korea, whereupon the North Koreans threatened to seize all of it, but haven't done it yet. Question?
You say you don't think it's that bad. You're saying you don't think South Korea is that bad that it would be pulled down if North Korea collapsed, or you don't think that North Korea is likely to collapse?
Thank you. I don't think that the South Korean economy will be pulled down if North Korea. Of course, I don't know. How do you define the economic collapse in North Korea? That's what you really have today. And, of course, South Korea is getting along just fine. But I suppose that might mean a concern that there could be thousands or tens of thousands or 100,000s of refugees come out of a North Korea that had collapsed politically. And that is a major concern, has been a major concern of the U.S. government and the Chinese government since about 1992. Thank you. Any question, ma'am?
How do you think South Korea could deal with a huge influx of immigrants from the north?
They have plans, as do the Chinese. It's not a question of immediate population, but of immediately how you feed tens and hundreds of thousands of people, and then over the intermediate term, what that does to your economy. Last December, the Russian energy minister reversed himself. He'd been claiming that the North Koreans could not possibly have nukes, and now he said, well, I guess they can make them. The South Korean president says ROK means Republic of Korea. North Korea's name is Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, and ROK. I seldom use those terms because they're hard to say. He says that the South Korea will not remain idle if U.S. uses fists against North Korea. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's a threat against the United States or what. But it does show you the extent to which the current center-left government in Korea is opposed or opposes the policies of the center-right Bush administration. Notice under January that China does not believe the U.S. claim of uranium-based nuclear program. North Korea continues to deny it has a uranium program. China says there's no evidence of it. Says China is the host of the six-party talks. Since the United States insists that the uranium program be on the agenda for those talks, and you can see that the U.S. is being set up to not be able to talk about the uranium program, and that prevents any progress from being made. It's very likely that North Korea does not want progress to be made on the hope that Bush will not be reelected. It's very likely that the Bush administration does not want any progress to be made because it doesn't know what to do and it doesn't know whether it will be in office. So we're kind of sliding right now, and that's what you're saying there. The second round of six-party talks was held in February. That's 6 months after the first. It included a 2.5-hour bilateral between the U.S. and North Korea, despite the Bush administration saying up to that point it would never meet bilaterally with North Korea. So you see that progress is occurring. The talks also established working level committees, which is a step forward, and they agreed to meet again, which they hadn't done in the previous one, so that's a step forward. You now see that North Korea is talking about withdrawing of United States forces Korea from the south as part of a nuclear deal. The perception in South Korea is that if U.S. forces withdraw, much as they hate U.S. forces, that if U.S. forces withdraw, they will be vulnerable to North Korea's military, which is essentially twice as big as theirs. On March 12th, ROC President Roh Moo-hyun was suspended as a result of appeasement. What's the word? He was impeached. ROC law, Republic of Korea law, requires that he be suspended during the impeachment process. He was reinstated 3 months later. The CIA reports to the White House that accelerated North Korean uranium program based on equipment and technology from Pakistan's Khan Research Laboratories. That's the father of the Pakistan atomic bomb has said and is being debriefed and has been debriefed, and I'm not privy to all they have said, that they gave technology to Libya and North Korea, among others. In return for that, the Pakistans got North Korean missiles, which are now threatening India. On March 25th, the Chinese foreign minister visited North Korea. That's unusual. Right after that, on this one right here, oh, I forgot I got a little pointer right here. I don't know where it is. Oh, no idea where that is. Oh, heck with it. You see this? We have this visit here, and then North Korea announces that it's rejecting the proposals made to the United States at the previous six-party talks, which is not to say that China was part and parcel to that. In fact, I believe China was trying to convince North Korea not to do that. But in any case, North Korea essentially, I believe, no one knows this, at least I don't know this, apparently North Korea refused this direct approach by the Chinese foreign minister to accept part of what the U.S. had proposed, and there we are. All of these entries right here are to show you how close North and South Korea are today. North Korea is making some steps toward economic reform. They started in 2002. They were essentially a failure at that time. They're trying again right now. It doesn't look to me they're very thorough. The prevailing view is that any real North Korean economic reform will bring down the regime because it will open the doors to the truth of how controlled are the North Korean people. That is a prevailing view, and I question it, frankly, because it didn't happen in China, and there have been other instances where that didn't happen. But in any case, that's the prevailing view. Notice the demotion here of the number 2 man in Korea for criticizing economic reforms. Notice in April a secret visit to Beijing. On his way back from that visit, there was a huge explosion in Yongchun. A British newspaper in the past 2 or 3 days has published a report saying that the North Korean security people found a cell telephone taped to something near where the spot of the explosion. These North Korean papers from the beginning until now have speculated that that explosion was an attempt to kill Kim Jong-il, who would have come through actually 12 hours before that secretly, but his schedule had called for him to come through about the time the bomb went off. Roh Moo-hyun was reinstated, and after that visit to China, I noticed that North Korea now is accepting six-party talks only 4 months after the last one. There was a 6-month interval the first time. The first two rounds achieved little. The 5 countries sitting down with North Korea all want denuclearization of the peninsula, but North Korea says, yeah, okay, but we want money. China, this time already in the past 3 days, this only came out 3 days ago. China now expects slow progress. The North Korean foreign ministry is saying what it always does before talks, that the U.S. is a monster and the U.S. torpedoes all the talks. North Korea rejects CVID, says that's something for a vanquished country, and we are not vanquished. Oh, my goodness. Okay, this has gone on much longer than I thought, so can't leave this mic. Yesterday was the 4th anniversary of this summit meeting between North and South. The North Koreans sent a 100-man delegation down to South Korea. The head of that delegation actually met with the Korean president. And these kinds of things happened in recent days through negotiations and other things. The two sides have huge speakers that are half as big as this room, arrays of speaker on the DMZ, and they beam or they broadcast propaganda designed to get the opposite side's military people to defect. And they've been doing that since shortly after the Korean War. That stopped, and they're being dismantled now. Twice in the past 5 years, there have been firefights in the West Sea. We would call it the Sea of Japan, between North and South naval forces that have resulted in significant loss of life. There is to vitiate that threat or the probability of future attacks. Yesterday or the day before, the two navies started in a protocol of talking to each other's boats in that area so that it can't happen again. The head of the NK delegation read a message, took a piece of paper out of his pocket when he was talking to President Roh Moo-hyun, and read a message from Kim Jong-il which called for major advancement in North-South relations. So, as we said, and as that slide made clear, the North-South relation thing is improving. At the same time, the U.S. has just announced that we'll be pulling 1/3 of its forces out of Korea. It announced earlier we pull out 3,500. It's now saying we'll pull out 1/3 by the end of next year. Yes, ma'am.
To my understanding, that's still like in negotiations, and that's not something that's final yet.
It's final.
It is.
Yeah. It's just a negotiation stuff as a face-saving move on the part of the South Korean government. This is a survey in the Chungang Ilbo recently, last week, of that many adults. 39% say withdrawal will hurt U.S. alliance, 47% say will not. That's very interesting. 10 years ago, that would have been 99% say that it will hurt. 49% disapprove of President No's performance, and that's better by about 10% than before he stepped aside for 3 months. 30% support our party, No Moo-hyun's party. That's down 10%. Shows that the Korean people are more positive on No than they have been, but that they're disgusted with our party, which they blame for their economic problems today. 28% support the opposition to GMP, about the same, probably statistical about hate. The Democratic Labour Party is the first socialist party in Korea. I think it got about 10% of legislative votes in election in April. Has lost about half of those now. 70% see the economy in crisis. And 59% see the current economic slump continuing. I think I already mentioned that one to you. U.S. and South Korean relations are souring. Concern over withdrawal, concern over relocation. The U.S. 2nd Division is being moved from an area near the DMZ to an area 40, 50 miles south of Seoul. There are bitter negotiations over this land relocation over 500 acres. The South Korean people who have over the past 5 years shown an anti-U.S. military trend that has grown strident now are zapping us or criticizing us for moving our troops out of harm's way. South Korea is moving to the left, second straight left-of-center government. Those that are falling heavily to the right, and they're getting older. I don't know how they'll change as they get older, but the chances are that South Korea will remain left-leaning forever or for the foreseeable future. Mostly, I've got to say, in reaction to 25 years of right-wing military government. We just cannot forget that. There is a hatred of the right there that is extreme. I mentioned it to you. I talked to a group of students in 1987, 200 students, who insisted that Ronald Reagan had been responsible for the massacre of 200 innocent civilians in the city of Gwangju in 1980. It happened in May of 1980, and Ronald Reagan wasn't elected until September. And he didn't take office until the following, February? But the hatred of the right is so strong in South Korea that they are going to blame things on Reagan until Bush comes along, and now it's Bush. So the hatred for Bush in South Korea, you have to take a look at it from a number of angles. One of the major reasons for anti-Americanism and for what the Koreans call the split or the cracks in the alliance, U.S. ROC perceptions of NK is radically different. Yesterday, the former unification minister Kim Dae-jung said Kim Jong-il was going to come back here and do another summit here in Seoul, but Bush became president. It caused him to run away. So there you've got an important guy. He was really involved. This minister was involved in setting up the first summit. So he is coming out publicly blaming the United States for actions that Kim Jong-il did not take. That is, I think, typical of South Korea today. It is less logic and more 감정, sentiment, feeling, emotion. There's some more things that they have done, including building roads and railroads across the DMZ at the same time that the United States is in what you might call a crisis with them. This is a fascinating poll. I'm going to zip right through it because of the time here, but the Gyeongyang Shinmun, I see I brought an earlier version of this thing along. I don't know why I did that. It interviewed 23 American experts on Korea and 30 South Korean experts on Korea, including in both cases academics and former government officials and even serving government officials. And this is a very telling survey. It appeared in the paper yesterday in Korea. Kim Jong-il is a worthy interlocutor. 80% of the Koreans said yes, only 48% of the Americans. An American expert said the alliance is shaky because the U.S. sees North Korean nukes as a threat, while the ROC worries about a U.S. attack on North Korea and the conventional threat. The ROC government's compliant North Korean policy is right. The word compliant there is the same one that you would use is the same one used about Attlee, is it? His 1939 trip to Czechoslovakia? It's the same term. Accommodation, let's say. Koreans say 80% correct. American experts say 65. North Korean issue should be resolved the Libya style or by regime change. Koreans 11%, Americans 40%. The issue should be resolved through dialogue and cooperation. Those two terms are ubiquitous in Korea. Koreans 48, Americans 36%. Six-party talks are the best way to solve it, 45 to 48. Bilateral talks are the best way to solve it, 52 to 30. So you see the bilateral talk is still the preferred way among common Koreans. It certainly is, and Bush's bash, we're not doing that. Japan is the most important nation in the U.S. strategy, 63 to 50. Korea is the most important nation in the U.S. Asian strategy, 4% to 5%, at least they agree. China is the second most important nation in the U.S. strategy, 33 to 41. The U.S. is the most crucial outside part of ROC security, 81 to 59. Even among Korean experts, you see that that's a much lower rate. And among American people, I suspect it would be even lower than that. And that's part of our problem.
In spite of all this, they still say that we got to be there to protect them. Is that what that basically?
They do. They do.
Now, I believe that, but I just want to that's what they're saying.
A major thing is that one point they're made, I think, the difference in perception over nuclear and the South Korean people do not believe that their brother North Koreans would ever use a nuclear weapon against them. They therefore feel virtually no threat either from North Korean missiles or from its nuclear stockpile. Whereas the U.S., we are removed from their conventional forces, so to us the major threat is only their missiles and their nuclear, or virtually only the missiles and the nukes. It makes a big difference between us. The second most crucial outside power to South Korean security is North Korea, 15 to 32. Notice how many more Americans believe that. The third most crucial outside power is China. Notice how small those numbers are, probably because the perception is that China has become mercantilist and less political. U.S. troop withdrawals will hurt the Iraq security, 40-30. The other poll I said it was about 39%. Here's 43%. So among the public and among the experts, the percentage is about the same. Withdrawals hurt about 40% of the Korean people feel that, and about 40% of the Korean people are so liberal they never say that. So you've got most of the Korean conservatives, or I can't divide that up. Anyway, a big chunk of the Korean people believe that. North Korea does not see the mobility of the relocated U.S. troops as a military threat. That should say does see it. I changed this slide and got the wrong version here. North Korea does believe that relocated U.S. troops are an increased threat to it. 50% of the Koreans, 13% of the Americans say that's true. U.S. troop withdrawal worsens anti-Americans. The U.S. withdrawal must change with the times. Change with the times. 100% of the Koreans say that. 77% of the Americans. And the reason for it is in the next one. The U.S.-Iraq relations are perpendicular, not horizontal. 60% to 78%. This change with the time means, and I've changed the slide I failed to bring. Recognize the U.S. Say that? No. Recognize that South Korea is now an important country. The Americans do not recognize that we have made these advances. Both countries are responsible, and both experts said they were. But if you talk to the people of South Korea, it's America's fault. To the extent that American people even notice it, they would probably say it was the Koreans' fault. U.S. a trustworthy ally, 27 to 61. Does not act like an ally, 57 to no response was noted. The NK threat is a major cause of differing U.S. reviews, 69 to 67. U.S. unilateralism, which is a code term for Bush administration, is the major cause of differing U.S. Iraq views, 15 to 10%. I'm surprised it's that low. The Korean public, I suspect it's much higher. The most crucial task, restore trust over the North Korean issue, 54. The U.S. must treat Iraq with the respect due to its enhanced national status, 23. Enhanced mutual respect, agree on perceptions. Those are NK missiles today. Questions on missiles? Those are the nukes. That is a frightening thing, because all along the North Koreans have surprised us with the relative sophistication of their technology, even though it's not nearly as sophisticated as advanced countries. So all those figures are based on 8 kilograms of plutonium, and they could probably do it for 4. So what do we do about NK? That's the end of that slide, and probably the end of all time. Good questions? Cindy.
It seems that Kim Jong-il has been isolated. Maybe not isolated, but he's certainly not meeting with the world leaders, and he certainly has had control of his country. And in your opinion, is he irrational, or is he well-founded? Might he do something that it seems illogical to us, or can we look at the facts and predict what he's going to do?
I addressed that question for 25 years, and until 1996 or so, I believed he was an irrational, drunken punk. Now it seems obvious that he is a very canny, smart guy. His perception of the world is canted. There is one report by a defector who was his personal filmmaker for many years and then redefected. That gentleman says that Kim Jong-il looks at movies like Rambo. Kim Jong-il is the world's biggest movie buff. And that Jong-il looks at movies like Rambo and doesn't realize that they're fiction, sees in them a certain reality that he should not. So he does have serious drawbacks, but he beat Clinton, and I believe he's beating Bush. And that's pretty good. Yeah. I think that intelligence analysts, which I spent most of my life doing, like to stay away from things you can't measure.
In your opinion, what is Kim Jong-il's ultimate goal?
Regime survival. And then secondarily, control of South Korea, preferably not by military means.
Question on the geopolitics of this. I've had some intimations that maybe the Chinese and the Japanese are not, while they'd like a nuke-free peninsula, they're not enthused about Korean unification. Have you seen or heard anything that would tend to confirm or deny that notion?
The South Koreans believe vociferously that the major countries on their periphery, or their neighboring countries as they would say, which includes Japan, China, and the United States, that none of those three actually wants the Korean Peninsula to be reunified. They do that for some of the reasons she may have been referring to, because they believe if they were only reunited, they could be a much greater country, if not the greatest country. From China's point of view, it wants a nice strong buffer between it and a capitalist and economically vibrant South Korea. However, China also vociferously, not vociferously, that implies that they state it, they don't usually state it. China strongly wants the Korean Peninsula to remain denuclearized, as they would say, because anything else might impel Japan and Taiwan to toy with nuclear development programs. Yes, sir.
It's hard to build a nuclear weapon. It's significantly harder to attach it to a missile. Is there any kind of expectation as to how long it would take North Korea to have that kind of technological progress?
I would say that the chances are better than equal, better than 50-50, that they have already miniaturized nuclear weapons for their missiles. And there are news reports that say that they received help doing that from underemployed Soviet nuclear scientists.
So am I hearing that some believe that North Korea has the capability right now to hit some part of the United States with a nuclear missile?
That Taepodong missile that they fired in 1998, I'm out of time here, but I've just got to tell you this anecdote. At the time that went off, Clinton had appointed a Blue Ribbon Commission headed by no less than today's Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, to look at the missile threat around the world. And they published it in August. And I believe that missile, the Taepodong-1, was fired on, I think, the 15th of August. And the Rumsfeld Commission's report came out a couple of weeks before that, and it said North Korea will not have a significant ballistic missile capability, three stages and not, until 2006 or 8. North Korea fired it 2 weeks later, and the Rumsfeld Commission recalled all of its classified and unclassified versions of its report and changed the stuff and then reissued it. I forgot the question now. I'm so happy over that thing. It shows you that Rummy is not always right, but some of you may not have realized that. I interpreted for Rumsfeld, and I really had a lot of fun once interpreting for him with the Korean counterparts. But what was your question again, Cindy?
The question was, are there some who believe that the capability exists right now for North Korea to hit the U.S.?
Now, that firing of the Taepodong was 6 years ago. In January of this year, North Korea test-fired a huge engine for a missile, which we believe is for the Taepodong-2. We got the satellite imagery picked that up. I checked that out just a couple of days ago for this, so I could come here on the Federation of American Science website. And they placed the future range of the Taepodong at over 5,000 miles, and believe Taepodong-2, that is, and say that its current range is sufficient to reach western states. Some other sources have said up through the Mississippi. I don't know. It's important to know that has not been test fired. But North Korea doesn't test fire things. They develop them, and then they do it and present you with a fait accompli.